Our thanks to Chris Van Clee for that story. And this problem is exacerbated here in Belgium. In the United States, as you know, we have one police force in a given city or in a given state. There's a state troopers, there are local police. Here in Brussels, for example, there are at least 6 different police units. They're not always talking to each other, although now they're better communicating to try and wrap up this terror threat. And a lot of people are saying to themselves, well, if these guys, if these terrorists could be living right under the noses of security officials in the wake of the Paris attacks on November 13th, how vulnerable are these targets still in Brussels today, Josh?
It seems some fundamental change is called for. Again, Vladimir Duthier there in Brussels. Vlad will be with you shortly. Meanwhile, we want to turn here now to Mike Baker. He's a former CIA covert operations officer, president of global security firm Diligence LLC. Good enough to join me now from Boise, Idaho. Good morning to you, Mike. I do want to start with one of the main suspects now behind the attacks, still on the run. From your experience, what should investigators be doing right now to find him?
Well, what they're engaged in is, obviously, they've got the CCTV footage. We've seen a couple of the screen grabs from that. And they are essentially going through an investigative process that really, there's not much new under the sun when it comes to that. It's a step-by-step effort. They're approaching everybody that they've been able to identify in his orbit, family, friends, etc. They're pulling out comms records. They're looking for any indications of movement from communications or from telephones that they may be aware of that are connected either directly to or to associates of the perp. So there's certain processes that are involved in this. It can be frustrating for the public because they think, well, just pick him up. But it's not that easy. As we've seen from Salah, he was in hiding not too far from his family home for months, being hidden by a network of family and friends. It is a very tight community that we're talking about in Belgium. So this is, they will pick him up, but they have to go through this process.
So how then to get into that community? How then to break through and really break into what could be a trove of intelligence inside that tightly wound community?
Right. Well, you've asked the most important question there is, frankly. And it's an enormous lift. We're going through the same process here in the U.S. where local, state, and federal authorities are working very hard. They're putting an increasing amount of resource into trying to work with Muslim communities here to develop some better level of communication, some better level of trust. Because at the end of the day, yes, of course, you want sources. You want to develop sources that are in these communities. And in Brussels, as an example, the authorities have been trying to develop a better network of informants, contact sources. But you also need to enhance the communication so that at some point, if a friend or an acquaintance or a family member sees someone that they know within that community starting to turn, starting to behave oddly, starting to associate with people that they consider radical, that they will at least feel to some degree that they can approach the authorities and say, we may have an issue. That is something that has to be accomplished, but that, acknowledged by everybody in counterterrorism, is probably the most difficult aspect of trying to defeat this problem.
Jim Carafano, meanwhile, joined us a bit earlier and spoke to the issue with so much of the organization now happening on the dark web and so much happening on encrypted websites. How to stop what is obviously a growing threat there on what is essentially a new frontier in the war against terror?
No, it's absolutely true. And listen, here in the U.S., the FBI and others involved in counterterrorism are very, very concerned about this problem. Once the individuals, once the network goes dark, once they're able to bury themselves in the world of encryption, you're taking away one very key element in the investigative process. And we saw that, again, with this ongoing issue related to Apple and the FBI over the San Bernardino phone. We saw where a lot of people were saying, well, telling the FBI, just do your other investigative work. Well, of course they're doing the other investigative work, just like the Belgian authorities are. You're going through, you're doing all the street work. You're working as many of the sources, informants as you can. You're doing all the possible technical collection that you can. You're working with the liaison partners. But as you pointed out, the technology aspect of this, those personal devices that oftentimes at a terrorist crime or a terrorist attack site or a crime scene are now the most important pieces of evidence. That's the biggest problem we're facing at this point in terms of the investigative effort.
And it's certainly a problem that needs to be overcome. Michael Baker, we appreciate the time today.
Sure. Thank you.